A family outing turned into a traumatising ordeal over hours of lost time, then resulted in a visitor with a sinister warning. Joe Gardner was nearly 5 years old when his lifetime of extraterrestrial contact began. In 1974, he and his mother were awaiting a cab to take them home with their shopping in Huntington, West Virginia, when he looked up to observe what he saw as a greyish cylinder. High up in the sky, the object was rotating end over end while in a stationary location. The metallic silver object glinted in the sun as it twirled and was still overhead when they got into the cab. Some months later, his family of 4, Joe, his older sister, mother, and father Joe Sr., embarked on a day trip into Kentucky to pick the then edible roadside blackberries. They were travelling County Road No. 9 when Joe's dad pointed out what he called a funny spaceship house. Joe saw a flattened ovoid structure with a rim around it, sitting on stilts, partially hidden amongst some trees. The object looked made of highly polished aluminium, was about 30 feet in diameter, and had 2 small round portholes along its base. After they passed the strange sight, Joe begged his father to return when he and Joe Sr. approached it. About 150 feet from the road, the spaceship-designed house had no driveway, sidewalk, or electrical wires, and its porthole windows were darkened. While Joe Sr. walked around the house, Joe touched one of its metal support legs and found it as cold as touching ice. Wondering if it was a new solar energy home, his dad banged on the side, producing a loud metallic clang as he shouted, asking if anyone was home. A strange voice returned his call, sounding old, cracked, and high-pitched. "Up here, up here." A narrow metallic great staircase extended from the craft, and Joe's dad picked him up and scaled the steps sideways. The seemingly flimsy steps flexed under their weight, then they entered a plain silver door which was hinged on the left side. Joe immediately saw the figure of an odd-looking man sitting in what seemed to be an upholstered chair. He had large black eyes like an ant, a large round head, thin arms and a spindly body. He wore human clothes, a green plaid shirt, blue jeans and boots, but when he stood up, the tall, gangly being really looked like a bug to Joe. But when Joe shouted that to his dad, he was told off for being rude. The pair found themselves in a large round room, fully lit up with a bright white light that came from no discernible source. The floors curved up into the walls and ceiling, with a seamless shelf or counter halfway up, as if the whole room was moulded from a single piece of material. When Joe Sr. asked where the structure got its power from, the being opened some low cabinets to show him, then motioned for Joe to help himself to something to eat and drink from a small round pedestal. There stood a cup and a plate holding small black round objects, which Joe assumed were chocolate cookies. However, the cookie he bit into was so horribly bitter that he immediately reached for the cup to wash away the taste. The tall tumbler was very heavy and clunky, as if made of stone or pottery, and held a greenish-yellow, viscous liquid with a consistency like pancake batter. Having to raise it with both hands, as soon as Joe took a sip, he blacked out. When he woke up, a chilling scenario confronted him. He was lying on a cold metal table and could not move any part of his body but for his eyes. He was naked except for his shirt and lay on his left side in a fetal position. His father sat in front of him on a bench, but he was expressionless, his mouth open, his eyes staring and unblinking. Joe was desperate to attract his attention and beg for help, but Joe Sr. looked like he was in a trance. A bright light shone down on Joe, and into his field of vision walked a figure wearing a white smock like a doctor's gown. Joe caught sight of the being's arm and hand with 3 long, smooth fingers, which held what looked like a long stainless steel knife with a metallic handle. Joe suddenly felt real panic, and that these beings were monsters who wanted to eat his family. Then came the repugnant sensation of something cold and hard going up inside him, after which he blacked out again. Some time period of which he was not aware later, Joe regained consciousness on hearing a woman's soft voice calling his name, Jojo. He saw before him a tall grey who seemed to be present to reassure him. She had large, liquidy, almond-shaped eyes and a tiny mouth with a slight smile, but no nose, ear holes or hair. Most astonishing about her appearance was that she had a sparkly aura of glittering, glowing particles swirling in a vortex around her head. The gentle and comforting E.T. nursed Joe back to full wakefulness, although with a strangely altered consciousness. She asked if he would like to see the ship, to which he agreed, noticing that the area around his table was now completely different, the bright light replaced by a hazy twilight and a low-lying mist swirling around the floor, accompanied by an acrid odour like sulphur. They ascended up a central spiral ramp, Joe walking while the grey glided upwards without using her legs. Shockingly, there in a darkened, massive room on the upper deck were 3 dentistry-style chairs, where sat his father, mother and sister, all reclined back and unmoving, while a cone of light shone down from above over each of them. The activity around each swirled like a whirlwind, while the sight of his sister, sitting with mouth and eyes wide open, so distressed Joe that he begged the grey to stop hurting his sister. She reassured him once more, telling him telepathically that it was okay, it was just a checkup, again and again. It was now clear to Joe that the spaceship house was much larger on the inside than it had appeared on the outside, and, on ascending to the upper level, that they were under some kind of massive dome through which they could see the stars. In Joe's awareness, there was now some kind of memory reset, as the next thing of which he was aware was sitting in the back seat of the family car behind his dad. The car was speeding, and all family members were hysterical. Glancing through the rear window, Joe saw a bright light and 2 figures silhouetted behind them in the heavy acrid air. His father was angry and cursing and weeping for the first time Joe had ever seen. On reaching home, they found that it was 2 a.m. Their family outing, which should have taken an hour or 2, had spanned over 10 hours. They all fell asleep in a pile in the middle of their living room floor. Joe was the most deeply impacted by their onboard encounter, repeatedly drawing the spacecraft and aliens in pictures which his father repeatedly destroyed. Unlike the other family members, Joe also talked about their experience to everyone he met. He had just started kindergarten and told everyone he knew there, and 2 months later told his 2 cousins who had come around to play. They didn't believe him and asked his father, who had just got home from work, if it was true. When Joe Sr. nodded his head yes, Joe felt proudly vindicated in his experience. This was the only time his father ever acknowledged experiencing the encounter. However, word got around, and several weeks later, something happened to cause Joe to consciously suppress his memory and its communication to others. After school one day, a man drove up to the Gardner's house and came to the front door. He was wearing a dark brown suit and mirrored sunglasses. He and Joe's dad talked in private for several minutes, and then the man departed. When he left, Joe Sr. was again beside himself with rage and nearly in tears as he ordered Joe to stop talking about the family's experience, as he risked the family being split up and being locked away in the so-called nut house. Sadly, Joe then felt that he was never able to talk about their onboard encounter again. His lifetime of UFO sightings and encounters is described in UFO researcher Preston Dennett's book, Onboard UFO Encounters. Joe studied art and now works as an artist, sometimes incorporating his supernatural experiences into his vibrant paintings.